The morning sun cast a golden hue over the courthouse steps as Judge Mei Lin prepared herself for one of the most significant days of her career. Her thoughts were focused on the high-profile case she was about to oversee, a case that had exposed deep-rooted racial tensions and drawn the attention of both local and national media. Judge Lin knew that her decisions in the coming days would resonate far beyond the courtroom walls. Dressed in a tailored black suit, Mei Lin climbed the courthouse steps, her gaze sweeping over the gathering crowd. Protesters with signs demanding justice stood on one side, while the press assembled on the other, cameras flashing, capturing every moment. Police officers had formed a line, creating a barrier between the protesters and the building's entrance. Their expressions guarded and tense. Mei felt the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. As a respected judge of Asian descent, she was no stranger to the challenges of navigating authority as a minority. Today, however, felt different. The courtroom would be a battleground, and she needed to be at her sharpest. As she neared the doors, a loud, authoritative voice cut through the air. "Hey, you can't be here. This area is restricted." Mei turned, her gaze meeting that of a tall, imposing police officer standing by the steps. His expression was severe, his posture rigid. She noted the name on his badge, Officer Sam Whitaker. With his broad shoulders and square jaw, he seemed every bit the stereotypical enforcer of the law. May's instincts told her to remain calm, but she felt an immediate surge of annoyance at his tone. "I'm sorry, officer," May said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm Judge Mei Lin. I'm here to preside over today's case." Whitaker's eyes narrowed, his lips curling slightly into a sneer. "Judge Lin? Right," he said dismissively. "Look, ma'am, you don't look like a judge, so I suggest you move along. This is a secure area." May clenched her jaw, reminding herself to stay composed. She had dealt with skepticism before. Her heritage and gender often led people to question her position, but she rarely encountered such blatant disrespect. Taking a deep breath, she spoke again, her voice firm. "Officer Whitaker, I am indeed Judge Lin. I need to enter the courthouse." For a moment, Whitaker seemed to hesitate, his gaze flickering with doubt, but his expression quickly hardened. "I don't have time for games. Step away from the courthouse now." May felt a wave of anger rising within her. This was her courthouse, her case, and yet this officer was treating her as if she didn't belong. She knew she could not afford to back down. "Not today. Officer Whitaker," she began, keeping her tone controlled. "I would appreciate it if you let me pass." "Yes, you. I am." Before she could finish, Whitaker's hand shot out, grabbing her arm. The grip was rough, and May gasped at the sudden contact. "Don't make this difficult," he growled, tightening his hold. May's instincts kicked in, and she tried to pull her arm free. "Let go of me," she demanded, her voice sharp. But instead of releasing her, Whitaker shoved her backward. The force of the push caught her off guard, and she stumbled, her heel slipping on the stone steps. She fell, hitting the ground with a painful thud. A sharp pain shot up her side, and she gasped, struggling to process what had just happened. For a moment, everything around her seemed to blur. The shocked murmurs of the crowd, the flashing of cameras, the weight of dozens of eyes watching her in disbelief. "Is that Judge Lin?" someone whispered nearby. The realization seemed to dawn on the onlookers, and they saw people pulling out their phones, recording the scene. The crowd shifted uneasily, torn between their shock and a desire to intervene. Whitaker's face paled slightly as he looked down at her, a glimmer of panic replacing his earlier arrogance. I didn't mean," he stammered, stepping back. May pushed herself to a seated position, wincing as a sharp pain flared in her side. She could taste blood in her mouth, the metallic tang mixing with the humiliation and anger boiling inside her. She was a judge, a person of authority, and yet here she was, assaulted on the courthouse steps by the very people meant to uphold the law. The sound of sirens grew louder, and May's mind raced, trying to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. The crowd parted as another figure approached, a man May recognized immediately. Detective Lucas Tran. one of her closest friends and a trusted colleague, pushed through the throngs of onlookers, his face etched with concern. "May, are you all right?" he asked, kneeling beside her. May forced a nod, though her body ached from the fall. "I'm fine, Lucas," she managed, her voice shaky but resolute. "But this cannot go unpunished." Lucas's gaze shifted to Whitaker, his eyes blazing with anger. "What the hell were you thinking, officer?" he demanded, his voice laced with fury. Whitaker's expression shifted from panic to defensiveness. I thought she was just a civilian causing trouble," he muttered. "I didn't know she was… I mean, she didn't look like… Like what? A judge." Lucas shot back, his voice rising. "You're telling me you assaulted a judge because of what she looked like?" Whitaker's jaw tightened, and he looked away, saying nothing. The tension in the air was electric, and May could feel the weight of the crowd's eyes on her. Her reputation, her authority, all of it had been questioned in one violent moment. But she was determined to stand her ground, to show everyone that this was far from over. With Lucas's help, May stood, brushing herself off despite the pain radiating through her side. She met Whitaker's gaze, her expression hard and unyielding. "I may look different from what you expect," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her authority. "But I am Judge Mei Lin, and I will not tolerate this abuse of power. You can count on that." Whitaker's face fell, the realization of the consequences finally sinking in. By the time May entered the courthouse, the video of the incident had already begun circulating online. Social media buzzed with reactions, and local news stations were picking up the story, broadcasting footage of her fall on the courthouse steps. Reporters were eager for a statement, and protesters had gathered in greater numbers, their chants demanding justice for her assault. Inside her chambers, May sat with Lucas, her body still aching from the impact. She held an ice pack against her bruised cheek, her mind racing as she tried to process the implications of the morning's events. "This is going to explode, May," Lucas said, his voice low. "The department's already put out a statement saying they'll investigate. But we both know what that means." May nodded, her gaze steely. "They'll try to bury it. Whitaker might get a slap on the wrist, maybe a temporary suspension. But the system will protect him. They always do." Lucas's expression hardened. "Then we don't let them. This isn't just about you, May. It's about everyone who's ever been profiled, dismissed, or treated as less than because of who they are. If we don't fight this, they'll just keep getting away with it." May looked at her friend, gratitude mingling with determination in her eyes. She had spent years fighting for justice within the walls of the courthouse. But now the fight had moved outside, into the very system that was supposed to support her. "Lucas," she said, her voice steady, "I'm not backing down. Not this time." As the news spread, May received a visit from Commissioner Helena Kim, the head of the city's police department. Commissioner Kim, a Korean-American woman with a reputation for being tough but fair, had been following May's career and admired her for her integrity. Judge Lin, Commissioner Kim greeted her with a nod, her expression sympathetic but serious. "I've seen the footage. What happened to you is unacceptable. And yes, there will be an internal investigation." May raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "I appreciate the sentiment, Commissioner, but we both know that internal investigations rarely lead to real accountability." Commissioner Kim sighed, understanding the doubt in May's voice. "Believe me, I'm well aware of the limitations within the system, but I can't change things overnight. Judge Lin, I need your help. If you're willing to work with me, we can bring the issue to light in a way that forces them to listen." May considered the offer, her gaze thoughtful. This was an opportunity to make real change, to expose the flaws in a system that had failed countless others. But it would be a battle, one that would require her to put everything on the line. "I'm in," she said finally, her voice firm, "but only if we're fully transparent. The city deserves to know the truth." Commissioner Kim nodded, a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Agreed. Let's do this." Over the next few days, Judge Mei Lin and Commissioner Helena Kim worked tirelessly to gather evidence and piece together a case against Officer Sam Whitaker. What started as a single incident on the courthouse steps was quickly becoming a larger investigation into patterns of misconduct and racial profiling within the department. Lucas, ever the reliable ally, brought May a thick stack of case files he had managed to pull. As they sat together in her chambers, flipping through the records, May began to notice a disturbing pattern: complaints filed against Whitaker over the years, each one carefully dismissed or resolved without disciplinary action. Witness statements and evidence were repeatedly overlooked, as though the department had shielded Whitaker from facing any consequences. "This isn't just negligence," May said, her voice barely concealing her anger. "Someone's been protecting him, possibly multiple people." Lucas nodded. "It's like a network. Whitaker's just one piece of it. There are others, higher up, who make sure complaints don't go anywhere. They silence anyone who tries to raise issues." May's fingers tightened around the edges of the files, her frustration building. She had always believed that the justice system, flawed as it was, could ultimately serve the people. But seeing the evidence in front of her, she realized just how deep the corruption ran. "We can't just keep this in-house." "Lucas," May said finally, "if we only rely on the system, they'll bury this investigation. We need to bring it to the public. Let them see what's really going on." Lucas looked at her with concern. "You realize that'll make you a target." "May, these are powerful people you're up against. If you go public, they'll do everything they can to discredit you." May took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I know, but I'm willing to face whatever comes. This is about more than me. It's about making sure no one else has to endure what I went through. It's about dismantling a system that allows people like Whitaker to abuse their power." May and Helena arranged a press conference to release the initial findings of their investigation. They presented evidence of Whitaker's past misconduct, as well as details of the numerous complaints that had been ignored or dismissed over the years. The room was packed with journalists, activists, and members of the community who had gathered to hear the judge and commissioner speak. May took the podium, her voice calm but resolute as she addressed the crowd. "This investigation has revealed a troubling pattern of abuse and systemic cover-ups within our police department. We cannot ignore this any longer. We owe it to our community to ensure that those who are meant to protect us are held accountable for their actions." Reporters fired questions at her, their voices merging into a chaotic buzz. "Judge Lin, do you believe Officer Whitaker will face criminal charges? Do you feel safe continuing this investigation? What would you say to those who believe you're overstepping your role as a judge?" May held up a hand, silencing the room. "I am not here to overstep my role. I am here to seek justice, for myself and for every member of our community who has suffered because of unchecked power. Officer Whitaker is not an isolated case. He is part of a larger problem that we must confront." Helena stepped forward, adding, "We're committed to a full and transparent investigation, and we'll be taking every complaint seriously. This is a time for change, and we are determined to make that change happen." The press conference sent shockwaves through the community. People rallied around May, flooding social media with messages of support. Protests grew in size, with demands for justice and police reform echoing throughout the city. May's courage became a beacon of hope for many, and it wasn't long before others came forward, sharing their own experiences with police misconduct. But with the public support came backlash. Anonymous threats started arriving at May's chambers, letters warning her to watch her back and urging her to let this go. She knew the risks, but she refused to back down. Instead, she doubled down on her resolve, determined to see this fight through to the end. As the public grew increasingly aware of Whitaker's actions and the police department's complicity, the backlash from within the department intensified. Whitaker's attorney, a high-powered defense lawyer named Charles Mitchell, held his own press conference, attempting to spin the story. "My client, Officer Whitaker, has served this city with dedication and integrity for over a decade," Mitchell declared, his tone smooth and confident. The so-called evidence against him is nothing more than a misinterpretation of his actions under difficult circumstances. He has been unfairly targeted in a politically motivated attack. Watching the broadcast in her chambers, May clench her fists. Mitchell's words were calculated to shift public opinion, to paint her as a rogue judge with a personal vendetta. She knew she couldn't let his narrative go unchallenged. Later that evening, May spoke with Helena and Lucas about countering Mitchell's statements. "We need people to see the truth," May said. "If we let Mitchell control the narrative, we'll lose the support of the public." Lucas nodded. "Let's bring in witnesses, people who've been directly affected by Whitaker's actions. If they're willing to speak out, it could make all the difference." Over the following days, May and Lucas met with former victims of Whitaker's abuse, listening to their stories and documenting each case. They invited these individuals to speak at a community meeting, giving them a platform to share their experiences. The meeting was emotional, raw, and powerful. People spoke of fear, humiliation, and trauma, all inflicted by an officer sworn to protect them. With each story, May's resolve hardened. She had taken on this fight for herself, but now she carried the weight of every person who had suffered in silence. This wasn't just her battle anymore. It was a fight for all those who had been wronged by the system. The case against Officer Whitaker finally went to trial, drawing national attention. News stations across the country covered the proceedings, painting May as a courageous figure standing up against systemic abuse. The courtroom was filled to capacity, with every seat taken by spectators, reporters, and activists eager to witness the trial unfold. As the prosecution presented its case, May sat as a witness, recounting her experience on the courthouse steps. She described the confrontation with Whitaker, his aggression, and the blatant disregard he had shown for her position and authority. Mitchell, Whitaker's defense attorney, attempted to discredit her, accusing her of exaggerating the incident and trying to exploit it for personal gain. "Judge Lynn," Mitchell said, his tone laced with skepticism, "are you suggesting that a decorated police officer, known for his exemplary service, would target you simply because of your appearance?" May met his gaze, her voice unwavering. "I'm suggesting that Officer Whitaker acted out of prejudice and abuse of power. I have seen firsthand how those in authority can use their position to silence those they consider beneath them. This is not an isolated incident, Mr. Mitchell. It's part of a larger problem that we can no longer ignore." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the gravity of the case. The prosecution then presented the evidence May and her team had gathered, showing a pattern of abuse, complaints that had been dismissed, and records that had mysteriously disappeared over the years. Witnesses took the stand, each recounting their own experiences with Whitaker, their voices filled with pain and anger. Whitaker's defense struggled to counter the mountain of evidence, but they continued to insist that he was simply doing his job. The more they argued, the more the public saw through their hollow justifications. As the trial neared its conclusion, the tension in the city reached a boiling point. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, waiting anxiously for the verdict. May knew that whatever the outcome, the decision would have far-reaching implications for the community and for her career. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty on multiple counts, including abuse of authority and assault. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps, and May felt a wave of relief wash over her. Justice had been served, but she knew this was only one battle won in a much larger war. Whitaker was sentenced to prison, and Commissioner Kim vowed to implement sweeping reforms within the department, including mandatory anti-bias training and independent oversight for complaints against officers. The City Council announced plans to establish a task force to address systemic issues within law enforcement, inspired by May's courageous stand. In the weeks following the trial, May received letters, emails, and phone calls from people across the country, thanking her for her bravery. Her story had inspired others to speak out, to demand justice and accountability in their own communities. May returned to her duties as a judge, but she knew she had been forever changed by the experience. She continued to work with Commissioner Kim, pushing for further reforms and using her position to advocate for those without a voice. At a community event held in her honor, May addressed the crowd, her voice filled with conviction. We must never be silent in the face of injustice. Today, we took a step forward, but there is much work to be done. Let us commit ourselves to building a future where no one has to fear those who are meant to protect them. The applause was thunderous, echoing the strength of a community united in purpose. The trial and its aftermath left an indelible mark on both Judge May Lin and the community she served. For May, the journey had been a testament to the power of resilience, justice, and standing up for what is right, even when it seems impossible. She had faced humiliation, prejudice, and the terrifying reality of confronting a corrupt system. Yet she emerged stronger, her integrity unshaken. May's courage became a catalyst for change in the city. Her ordeal had exposed not only Officer Whitaker's actions, but also the deeper issues within the police department and justice system. People began to question long-standing practices, and the city council, under mounting public pressure, initiated reforms aimed at making law enforcement more accountable and transparent. New policies were enacted, not just to address police misconduct, but to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the communities they served. As she resumed her duties in the courthouse, May found a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the fight for justice wasn't a single battle, but a continuous effort. She vowed to use her platform to ensure that the voices of the marginalized were heard, that no one would be silenced or made to feel invisible under her watch. Her story became a symbol of hope, a reminder that one person's courage could spark a movement and inspire countless others to stand up against injustice. The incident had tested her resolve, but it had also brought her closer to the community she served, uniting them in a shared vision of a more just and equitable society. And as for Officer Whitaker, his conviction sent a powerful message. No one, regardless of their status or position, is above the law. His downfall marked a turning point, not just for May, but for the entire city, a first step toward a system that genuinely upholds the values of fairness, respect, and justice. In the end, Judge May Lin's story was not just about holding one man accountable. It was about illuminating a path forward. It was a story of resilience, transformation, and the unwavering belief that justice, though sometimes slow and fraught with obstacles, will prevail as long as there are those willing to fight for it. With her legacy now woven into the fabric of the city, May's journey served as a beacon of change, reminding everyone that courage and integrity have the power to reshape even the most entrenched systems, and that each of us, no matter our role, can be a part of that change.